I must admit that when I received the invitation to come here, I checked the date. I wondered if it was April the 1st. It was a bit of a surprise to me. And then I started thinking about, so why was I invited here? Because although I've come now, this is my third visit to an ESSA conference, I really don't see myself as a social simulator. I've worked in the area, but my interest is really more in the cognitive aspect, as Renika has said. So I thought what I'm going to do today is to talk about where I've come from and how I think it relates to the social simulation and how there are things that can be learned for both communities. So as I said, I think a quite significant part of my talk today is going to be about my background and explaining it to you, putting it into context. But then this hot topic of social intelligence, what I really want to do today is to try to dig down about what social intelligence really is and why I think it's important for a range of different communities, why we need it, and then some first sort of insights about how I think we should model it. At the moment, it's very much a conceptual model. Unlike others who've presented here, I don't have anything that's actually been implemented. But it is something that I am intending to do in the future, so I'm going to talk about some of those ideas. So, as has been said, my background is in agent-based modeling of human behaviour, particularly in extending the belief, desires and intentions model. I'll talk a bit more about what that is without going into too much detail in a minute. And the focus has been very much, in those early days, on individual behaviour. However, I did find very early on, you can't get very far if you ignore social interaction, and I'll come back to that. But first of all, BDI agents, they're based in Bratman's intentional stance, sorry, I should say Dennett's intentional stance, which was first put into a computational model by Bratman. And the idea is that an agent will intend to do what it believes will further its goals, given its beliefs about a world. Okay, now that's very abstract. As an aside, I tend to refer to goals rather than desires. Okay, goals are a bit more concrete than desires. There are some sort of technical details that I'm happy to discuss offline with people about the differences. So technically speaking, I do use BGI agents, but that's an aside. But the intentional stance itself is based in folk psychology, so the natural way that people explain the actions of others. So for example, if we have an observation that somebody took the last piece of cake from the plate, and if we want to give an explanation for that behaviour, we might say, oh, it's because he was starving. Or alternately, we might say he was a bit more altruistic because he thought everybody else had had some. Okay, so we're talking about the state of that person who took the cake. And it's quite a robust way that we have of explaining the behaviour of others. Another example would be she left the meeting early. Well, why did she leave the meeting early? Well, because she didn't want to be late for her next appointment. Or alternatively, because she thought the meeting was a waste of time. And you can see how these are very different motivational explanations for the person's behaviour. Okay? We do this all the time, every day. That's why it's called folk psychology, when we're thinking about why people have done certain things. In the BDI model, what we're doing is taking that way of explaining behaviour and using it instead to generate behaviour. So we have basic core concepts in our thing, which are the beliefs, the desires, and the intentions of the agent. These are the core things to modelling they are the core aspects of the agent, and they're sort of the building blocks that we use in the agent. Now, they're very high level and abstract still. They're not going down to the low level things that a lot of you use when you're modelling things. But the basis actually brings some benefits, right? First of all, in terms of knowledge acquisition. If we're talking to a subject matter expert and we want to know about how they go about doing something, because they're used to explaining things in these terms, they can, very easily fill in beliefs, desires, and intentions. They're concepts that they naturally believe in. It does have a downside in that people will sort of self-justify the way that they've done things, and the explanation that they give might not be the actual reasoning that they use. But with certain interview techniques and things that, again, I can talk about offline if you're interested in, we can get around that kind of problem. The other one is something that in one of the talks yesterday, somebody said it's quite useful in model verification. I know that there's at least one person in the room who disagrees with this and whose hackles are raising at the moment. But I do believe that with the BDI model, you have a good chance of being able to see what's caused the behaviour of the agents. You can trace through the plans which beliefs were causing the activation of plans, and you can get a behaviour trace that in some way is understandable by the lay people, and they can say, yeah, that looks like a plausible course of events, or no, we never would have made that decision, and then you can use that to revise your agents. So I think these are benefits brought about by BDI. But there are also reasons why you would not use BDI. Okay? First of all, as I said, the BDI model's a model of how we think, rather than how the brain works. So here am I saying that I'm interested in cognitive modelling, but in some sense BDI isn't cognitive modelling. It doesn't have that grounding in the psychological literature that other cognitive modelling languages such as ACT-R or GOMS or so on do have, right? So that's one reason for not using BDI. The model's very abstract, ignoring a range of characteristics of human behaviour. So we have beliefs, desires and intention. It ignores emotions. It ignores physical constraints of an embodied person. There's all sorts of things which just are not there in this model. And at the same time, the model can be too complex for some situations. And particularly in social simulation, it can be a lot of overhead sometimes for the types of models. If you have thousands of agents, trying to fill in beliefs, desires and intentions of thousands of agents can be a huge overhead. Okay? Now, as I said, they weren't designed for cognitive modelling. They were not even designed for modelling human behaviour. In fact, the original intention, when Bratman first proposed the model, the intention was simply to have a model that could balance reactive and deliberative behaviour. Okay? Now, as it turned out, a number of people said, oh, this is based in folk psychology, this is how human reasoning works, so we'll use it to model humans. And it's been quite successful over a long period for that type of thing. As I said, there's these other frameworks that were developed specifically for capturing cognitive processes. It is possible, though, as was mentioned in my introduction, to extend the BDI model to more closely represent cognitive processes. And in particular, I worked in the early days on the Kojak project as it was getting started, which was adding a cognitive overlay to Jack, which is a particular BDI implementation. And that has been used quite extensively. It was originally developed for the British Ministry of Defence, and now it's used in the US and I believe in the Netherlands as well by the Defence Research Organisation, whatever the name is here, sorry, I can't remember. And what that does is it extends that BDI framework and adds extra layers to it so that you have things like perceptual motor overlay, you can put in things about sort of memory decay, you can add, and you can turn all these features on or off as is needed for a particular model. Okay, so it becomes a lot more cognitively plausible than the basic BDI model. And BDI in social simulation, well, it has been used extensively, but the models in the social simulation domain tend to be considerably less complex models of human behaviour. As I said, largely just because you can't have the same level of detail as when you're modelling an individual if you want to model thousands of individuals. And my argument is that the benefit of BDI for social simulation is in this explanatory power. So, as I said, I know this is raising hackles of at least one person. But the downside is that the overheads might not justify it. Okay, because there are significant, it's computationally quite expensive to run a BDI model, and it takes a lot of setting up. But the topic of this talk was about social intelligence, okay? And so the question is, so where does social intelligence come into this? And remember I said I was originally interested more in modelling individual behaviour, but I said you can't get very far if you ignore social interaction. Now, in my original work, I really was trying to ignore social aspects. I had no dialogue. That was a particular thing that I wanted to avoid. I had no cooperation or coordination or teamwork. Okay. In fact, what I was trying to model, so my PhD was sponsored by the Air Operations Division of the Defence Science and Technology Organisation in Australia. They were interested in using BDI for modelling fighter pilots. These pilots, they do have some form of teamwork, but there were other people researching the teamwork aspect. Okay? They have very little communication, so it was fine to ignore that. You could do it as a very simple protocol, the communication, because they want to minimise radio contact. But I didn't want to go through all the hoo-ha of getting security clearance and working with pilot models and, you know, getting the difficulty of actually being able to do knowledge elicitation with these very expensive people whose time was very valuable. So with agreement with them, I was looking at a first-person shooter game of Quake 2 and trying to build models of behaviour. It had a lot of benefits. There were, at the time that I was doing it, it was a very popular game. I could walk down into the PC labs in the computer science building where you weren't meant to use them for games, but I would find 10 volunteers at any given time, a day or night, who could be my subject matter experts for modelling. Okay, so it had that benefit. And again, there's no communication going on there. It tends not to be teamwork. It's just sort of a one-on-one, winner wins all kind of thing. But unless you lock a person in solitary confinement, there's always going to be some form of social interaction. Okay? Even if they weren't working in teams, even if they weren't talking to each other, they were still taking the other players into account. Okay? So there was social intelligence going on there. So I've used social intelligence, social interaction and collective intelligence in different ways. Like Castelfranchi, so this goes back a long way, 1998, I use the terms social action or social interaction and social intelligence interchangeably. Communication, as I said, is not an essential element of social action, nor is cooperation or coordination. The key is that you recognise other agents as entities, reasoning agents with their own agendas that are part of a larger society. Okay? So you recognise them as being in some way like you, that they are reasoning in similar ways to you, and that they are also reasoning about the other entities in the society. Okay? So that sort of starts to talk about what social intelligence is, but then I sort of thought, well, you know, really, what is social intelligence? And I went to the social psychology literature. The social psychology literature on social intelligence goes right back to 1920, but I've actually used a definition from 1933 here, which, just because the wording was a bit nicer, which says that social intelligence is an individual's ability to get along with people in general, their social technique or ease in society, knowledge of social matters, susceptibility to stimuli from other members of a group, as well as insight into the temporary moods or underlying personality traits of strangers. Now, there's an awful lot there, okay? And I'll come back to it. So what does it mean? So the previous definition, it says what it is, but not what it actually achieves. Okay, so let's think about that a bit more. In a nutshell, it means that an individual's behaviour is moderated by the behaviour of others. They're aware of others, abilities, desires, needs, relationships, all those sorts of things. And they're able to work with them to further goals. Okay? Not necessarily as part of teamwork, okay? But as they are approaching their goals, they think about how others might thwart or aid them involuntarily even, but based upon what they know about that person, what they're doing. So going back to that definition before, there were 5 parts to it, okay? 5 different things. We had the ability to get along with people in general, social technique or ease in society, knowledge of social matters, susceptibility to stimuli, and insight into others, right? 5 things there. If we actually wanted to implement a model of social intelligence, how would we use those elements of the definition? First of all, we have this, I'll start with the second point. I'd say that sort of relates to a self-image kind of thing. So this is, you know, where you see yourself. We have this awareness that there are some expected behaviours, and you can probably put a label on that straight away. I will in a couple of slides. Ability to recognise and respond to cues. Awareness that other societal members are in some sense like yourself. You know, you might know that there are differences between you and them, but at their core they're driven by similar things to yourself. And I've left that first one because I think it's a bit tricky. The ability to get along with people in general. It's a bit fuzzy and I'm not really quite sure how that fits into my model at the moment. So I just leave it labelled tricky at the moment. Now, it's worth mentioning when you look at the social psychology literature that an awful lot of the recent literature is relating social intelligence and autism. In fact, going back 50 odd years even. And I don't know how many people of you have sort of knowledge about autism, know people who are on the autistic spectrum or whatever, but the autistic spectrum is a very broad thing, and there might be people in this room who label themselves as that, and you wouldn't see, you know, you're probably quite comfortable with most of those aspects of that were in that previous slide, but there'll be sort of certain aspects of it that you're not so good at. Whereas people on the extreme end of the autistic spectrum, they probably struggle with every one of those aspects on the previous slide. Okay, so, you know, they don't see other people as being like themselves. They're just the same as a car or, you know, something else, some other moving object in the world. They can't reason about them in the same way that we do. Now, of course, social psychology isn't the only place that has something to say about social intelligence. Another place where it's really big at the moment is in business. And so here's this book that was released, what's the date on it? 2005, 10 years ago, which is really aimed at sort of encouraging people to develop their social intelligence with the argument that it's better for business if you do, okay? And they have 5 core parts to it, which is the situational awareness, presence, authenticity, clarity, and empathy. And they say, work on these 5 aspects and you will be more socially intelligent. Now, I'm not sure that that is necessarily useful for us as modelers, but you could maybe think about a framework that was based around those 5 aspects instead of the 5 that I chose on the previous slides. So personally, it's not the way that I'm going, but it's something that I've sort of got in the back of my mind that you need to at least acknowledge that it's there. Now, having said that, I want to say that aspects of social intelligence are widely studied, okay, in the agent-based modelling community and beyond. And if you go into the literature, there's huge amounts on norms particularly, and you've seen a lot in this conference series on norms and norm development, evolution of norms, all that sort of thing. There have been some very large European projects on that thing. Reputation, trust, negotiation, argumentation, responsibility, obligations, all of these things are in some way related to social intelligence because they have a social aspect to them, okay? And norms particularly often get conflated with social intelligence in the literature. So if you read a lot of the papers on norms, they talk about it as if this is the be-all and end-all of social intelligence. But I think it's social intelligence is a lot more than just norms. And my argument is that aspects in isolation aren't enough, okay? They only give part of the picture, and particularly a lot of those things are interdependent, okay? So trust and reputation are obviously related. Yeah? Obligation and trust are related. And, you know, there are all these types of things where, and some of them have been studied together, but I'm saying, well, actually, I think they all fall under the umbrella of social intelligence, so they are all interrelated in some way. Okay, and it could also be argued that some of those things, rather than being sort of things that create social intelligence, that they actually arise from social intelligence. So if you have a model of social intelligence, maybe you'll naturally get a lot of those things falling out rather than having to model them separately. Okay, so my argument is we actually need a big picture view of social intelligence. We need a better picture of how these aspects relate to each other. Why? Well, first of all, how is ignoring any given aspect going to impact on the others? Okay, so we want to turn off, we just don't want to worry about reputation. What does that mean in a model of trust if we're ignoring reputation? Okay, I'd say actually it's quite dangerous to ignore reputation when you've got a model of trust, but some people do. When can we reasonably ignore certain aspects and still have a meaningful model? Okay, so if we've got this big picture, we can make better decisions about what we're going to ignore and what we're not. But really, why do we want social intelligence in the first place? Right? And I'm going to start by saying, so why do I want social intelligence? Okay. Essentially, because even avoiding social interaction as much as possible, it's inevitable. We treat other people as different to non-agent entities in the environment. Okay, so even when I was modelling people in this first-person shoot-'em-up, the other players were, in their heads, very different to the weapons, the armour, the health power-ups, the places they could hide and that sort of thing. They were just a different class of thing. Okay. Why else would you want to model it? Well, let me give you a scenario. Say you have an open system, an environment that any agents could join. This type of thing is getting sort of more common in things like, so the open power markets, where you have sort of, you can bid for your electricity supplier at any given time, that kind of thing. You can change suppliers like that rather than having to go through a horrible process that takes 6 weeks and then they bill you again from the supplier that you had and all that sort of thing. Well, it's changing slowly, but it is. And we can, rather than doing this ourselves, we can have proxies to do it for us. So we have agents that are in this, going in on our behalf into this environment. With social intelligence, those agents don't need to be able to have really strict rules about the protocols that are involved in these systems and that sort of thing. They can go in and they can negotiate a position and, you know, get you the best deal. But more than that, the distributor companies can build models of your representatives and they can then design their systems to better suit the needs of their customers. Okay, so we have agents that are reasoning about other agents in the system without having a really formal protocol for what's going on between them. So that's one possibility. The alternative is what Gail Kaminka has referred to as robot autism. And this is the idea that these agents, they're defined by a strict protocol that's hard-coded into them. They work by that protocol and, you know, they have this set of rules that they obey, and that's it. There's no sort of thinking outside the box. For a certain task, that works really well, but once that task starts changing and so on, unless you change the protocol to work with them, the agents just don't work properly. So another scenario where you might want social intelligence, if you have an environment in which agents and humans must cooperate as part of a team. Say, the one I like to use is a search and rescue type thing, where you've got sort of unmanned aerial vehicles or ground-based vehicles that are going into a disaster zone to try and find people, and then you need humans to actually go out and do once the victims are found, to actually go out and help them. Okay. We need to move beyond the humans seeing the agents as tools to actual team members. When humans see agents or software in general as tools, they kind of don't expect it to do exactly what it's told, and they're constantly monitoring it and, you know, just making sure and spending a lot of effort in making sure that the agents are doing the job that they're meant to be doing. If they're seen as trustworthy team members, on the other hand, then you can delegate a task and you can expect them to give you the information at a timely manner. They're not going to interrupt an important task with trivial information. You know, you have this confidence in the team. Okay. You have similar things when you have poor teamwork amongst humans as well. If you have, if you've got team members who you're really not sure are going to do the job properly, then you expend an awful lot of time supervising them and making sure they're doing their job properly, and it's a sign of a bad team. Well, you get the same thing with human-agent interactions. Okay, so my proposition is that if we give the agents social intelligence, if what they're doing as part of their job is building a trust relationship with their team, that they're working to build up this reputation, that they're following the rules that they are expected to, that they're sensitive to the cues from the people that they're working with, then they're going to work better as part of a team, and the humans will see them better as part of a team. Okay, so that's what social intelligence is and why I think it's important. So the tricky question is, how should we actually model it? So I'm going to go back to the 4 of those 5 points and ignoring the tricky one and think about how I would actually incorporate that into a model. First of all is that we had the awareness of a self as a societal member, and I'm going to call that a self-image, right? So I'll just label that self for now. Awareness that society has expected behaviours, and as I said, I think a lot of you would have put this label on it already, of norms. We have the awareness that other societal members are like self. I'll label that theory of mind. And obviously there's a relationship between those things, right? And then we have the ability to recognise and respond to cues from societal members. Well, so far we've got these things are the agent inside the box. Outside the box you have the environment. So for that 4th one, what we actually have are social cues coming from outside the agent and social action going into the environment. And that means that at this, can I get my mouse to work? At this interface here and at this interface here, you've got some sort of filter which is looking for particular things in the environment and having a set of social rules that need to be acted upon, followed, that kind of thing. So let's delve into those things a little bit more. First of all, you have the self-image. So this is the knowledge of oneself as part of society, right? You want to be seen in a particular way, okay? Now I think most of us would say we want to be seen as helpful, trustworthy, these are all desirable things, but you might want to see yourself as being powerful and, you shouldn't cross them and, have a different sort of self-image that you want to project. So this is part of this self kind of thing. It also has an aspect of knowing one's place in society. So this is about, your relationship to other people, power relationships, for example, who you should be, sort of in some sense, looking up to, who you should expect to be looking up to you, that kind of thing. So that's an aspect of the self-image. Norms, as I'm talking about it here, are not the norms themselves, but the recognition that norms exist. Okay, there's a subtle difference there. To explain that a bit better, social intelligent agents should expect to find norms in society, but they may not know in advance what those norms are going to be. Okay? So if you went to a foreign country that you'd never been to before, a society that you didn't know, you might not know, what is considered polite and what's considered impolite, but I'd say most people in this room would have the sense to observe and kind of work it out pretty quickly that, for example, in Asia it's impolite to blow your nose in public. Yeah? And that sort of thing. Okay, so you're expecting to see these types of things. In terms of the theory of mind, well, I think we know what we mean by theory of mind. We want to recognise other members of society as like ourselves. We want to build mental models of these other members. But I should point out that the level of detail of the theory of mind that you build is going to depend upon the relationships that you have with the people as well. So somebody that you work closely with, you'll have quite a detailed theory of mind of that person, whereas a student that you see once a week, you'll have a much more simple theory of mind of them. Okay? And indeed, with different students in your class, you probably have different levels of theory of mind of each of them. Some of them you know better and you have a richer picture of their motivations and what's driving them, and others you have well, I guess you're just kind of like a standard student and you have a standard student kind of pattern for them. So the societal cues in action then, although they're drawn outside the agent, as I said, the agent needs an internal means of recognising cues, so the relevant cues, particularly with relation to norms. Right? And so there will be things like recognising patterns of behaviour in society, the things that people normally do, kind of thing. So everybody drives on the right, for example, that kind of thing. And particular signals, you know, disapproving looks from people, that type of thing. And also of determining appropriate actions. So mimicking is one possibility here, and I'm sure there are other possibilities here, but I don't know yet. Right? But I think mimicking plays a big part. So you know, if you're not sure what the appropriate action is, you look at what other people are doing and you think I probably should follow. So where are we going from here? Well, this model, as I said, it's a conceptual model. It's extremely abstract, and of course the devil's in the detail. What I'm intending to be doing over the next couple of years is fleshing out that detail. You still need an underlying model for reasoning and action. Because of my background, that's likely to be BDI, but I don't think it has to be BDI. Okay, you could have the underlying model of reasoning and action, in a sense, can be plugged into this higher level model. It's underneath what we've got here. Frank Dignam and his colleagues have proposed an approach which isn't entirely incompatible with this model, based upon McClellan's theory of human motivation. Okay, so this is the idea that as humans we have some basic motivational needs that need to be fulfilled, and they kind of balance against each other. And it could be mapped to this kind of thing. So it's something to consider. But most importantly, I think, is that we need to be able to, with this model, to be able to draw the links between the things that are typically associated with social intelligence, so that big list of things that I had early on, and the meta model. Okay, because for me, that's really the motivation for doing this, is to be able to understand how all of these things are related to each other, and if we have this big picture, can we model those things more accurately or get different answers about them? I'm not 100% sure. Okay, that's what I just said. So, I've finished a bit early, but any questions?